Daniel McAllister's fingers had locked around the twin babies 6 hours ago, and now he couldn't feel them anymore. Couldn't feel his arms. Couldn't feel the reins. Couldn't feel anything except the certainty that if he let go, if he loosened his grip even once, these two little girls would tumble 40 feet down the canyon pass, and nobody would ever know they'd existed at all. His vision blurred. The horse stumbled. And somewhere in the distance, through the gathering darkness of an August evening in 1878, he saw a light burning in a ranch house window. Just hold on. Just hold on. Just... Before we ride into this story of death and salvation of love, born from massacre, I need you to do something for me. Hit that subscribe button right now because this tale gets darker before it gets lighter, and you'll want to see how it ends. And tell me in the comments what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story of mercy and blood travels across this country of ours. The Wyoming Territory sky was bleeding out when Margaret Brennan stepped onto her porch, wiping flour from her hands onto her apron. She'd been making bread Irish soda bread the way her mother taught her back in County Cork, before the famine took everything before America became the only choice left. The dough was rising in the warm kitchen, and she'd come outside for just a moment of peace. Just one moment where she didn't have to think about the empty chair at her table, or the small grave under the cottonwood tree, or the ranch hands who looked at her with pity mixed with doubt. A widow running a cattle ranch. A woman giving orders to men. An Irish immigrant trying to hold on to land in a territory that ate the weak and spit out the bones. She was tired. God, she was tired. And then she saw him. At first, Margaret thought it was a trick of the light, the way the setting sun played games with distance and hope. A rider approaching from the northwest moving wrong. Too slow. Too crooked. The horse was walking, not trotting, and the man on its back was swaying like a drunk or a dead man who didn't know enough to fall. "Mother Mary?" Margaret whispered, and her hand went to her throat, where her rosary used to hang before she'd pawned it last winter to pay the feed bills. She ran. Didn't think about it, didn't calculate the risk of approaching a stranger in dying light, just lifted her skirts and ran down the porch steps across the yard, through the gate she'd mended herself after Thomas died, because there was nobody left to do it for her. "Hey!" she called out, her Irish accent thickening the way it always did when she was frightened. "Hey, can you hear me?" The rider didn't respond, didn't even lift his head, just kept swaying, kept moving forward like a compass needle pointing towards something only he could see. Margaret ran harder. The evening air was thick and golden, filled with the sound of crickets, and her own ragged breathing and the steady clip-clop of the horse's hooves. As she got closer, she could see details that made her blood run cold. The man wasn't just exhausted, he was clutching something against his chest. 2 bundles wrapped in what looked like blood-stained cloth. And from those bundles came a sound that Margaret hadn't heard in 3 years, not since Patrick died with fever burning through his small body. Babies crying. "Jesus, Mary, and Joseph." Margaret breathed and reached the horse's side just as it stopped of its own accord. The animal was heaving its flanks dark with sweat foam at its mouth. This horse had been ridden hard and long, pushed past any reasonable limit. But the man in the saddle, Margaret looked up at him and felt her heart clench. He was young, couldn't be more than 30, with dark hair plastered to his skull with sweat and dirt. His eyes were closed. His face was burned raw by sun and wind. His lips were cracked and bleeding, and his arms were locked in a position that looked painful, cradling the crying bundles against his chest like they were the last holy things in a fallen world. "Can you hear me?" Margaret asked softer now, reaching up to touch his boot. His eyes opened. Barely. Just slits of awareness in a face gone gray with exhaustion. "Babies," he whispered. His voice was sandpaper rough. "Take the babies." I will," Margaret said quickly. "But I need you to loosen your arms. Can you do that?" He tried. She saw him try. But his arms stayed locked, muscles frozen in place from hours of holding the same desperate position. "All right," Margaret said, making her voice calm even though panic was rising in her throat. "All right, we'll do this together. I'm going to take one, then the other. You just hold steady." She reached up and so carefully began to work one bundle free from his grip. His fingers were like iron, but she was persistent, and finally the first baby, a girl. Margaret saw immediately, with a shock of dark hair and eyes squeezed shut against the world, came loose into her arms. The infant couldn't have been more than 4 or 5 months old. She was wrapped in what had once been a woman's shawl, now torn and stained with things Margaret didn't want to identify. The baby was too light. Hadn't been fed properly in at least a day. "Sweet girl," Margaret murmured automatically, the Irish endearments coming without thought. "Sweet Colleen, you're safe now." She tucked the first baby into the crook of her left arm and reached up for the second. This one was identical to the first twins, she realized with a jolt. 2 baby girls who should have been sleeping peacefully in a cradle somewhere, not clutched in the arms of an exhausted stranger in the middle of the Wyoming prairie. As soon as the second baby was free, the man's body began to collapse. He tilted forward in the saddle, his hands dropping to the saddle horn, and Margaret barely had time to step back before he simply gave up. His body went limp, and he would have fallen face first into the dirt if Margaret hadn't screamed, "Help somebody, help me!" Old Jake Williams came running from the barn, his weathered face shocked. Behind him came 2 younger hands, Miguel and Charlie, both stopping short when they saw the scene. "Mrs. Brennan, what in blazes?" "Help me get him down," Margaret commanded, her voice sharp with authority. "Carefully. I don't know what condition he's in." The men moved fast, easing the stranger from the saddle. He was dead weight, completely unconscious. They laid him on the ground, and Margaret knelt beside him as best she could with 2 babies in her arms, pressing her ear to his chest. His heart was beating, faint but there, and his breathing, though shallow and labored, was regular enough. "He's alive," she said, relief flooding through her. "Jake, help me get him inside. Miguel, take care of that horse. Cool him down. Slow water, but not too much. Charlie, ride to town and fetch Doc Morrison if he's there." "Yes, ma'am," they chorused and scattered to their tasks. Margaret stood the twins screaming now in earnest, their cries piercing the evening air. She looked down at the unconscious man, at his torn clothes and battered hands, at the way his fingers still curved slightly, as if still holding something precious. "Who are you?" she whispered. "And what in God's name did you ride through to get here?" Inside the ranch house, they laid him on the sofa, the horsehair sofa Thomas had ordered from Chicago back when they'd first married, back when the future seemed full of nothing but promise. Margaret stood over him with the twins still crying in her arms, trying to decide what to do first. The babies won. They always would. She carried them to the kitchen and laid them side by side on the table, quickly checking them for injuries. They seemed whole. Dirty, hungry, frightened, but whole. No wounds, no breaks. Their cries were strong, which was good. Weak babies didn't cry like that. "Hush now, hush," Margaret murmured, working by instinct and memory. It had been 3 years since Patrick died, 3 years since she'd held a baby, but her hands remembered the motions, checking their fontanelles, their bellies, their little limbs. Both girls were wearing simple cotton gowns beneath the blood-stained shawl. Someone had cared for them, dressed them with love. But how long ago Jake appeared in the doorway. "What do you need, Mrs. Brennan?" "Milk," Margaret said immediately. "Fresh from Bessie, if you can manage it. And clean cloths, lots of them. And send Rosa Martinez if she's home. I need another woman's hands." "Rosa's visiting her sister in Cheyenne," Jake said. "Won't be back till next week." Margaret's jaw tightened. Of course. When did anything ever come easy? Then just the milk and cloths. Go. Alone with the babies, Margaret felt something crack open inside her chest. Something she'd kept sealed tight for 3 years. She looked down at the 2 little faces, both red and scrunched with crying, and felt tears sting her eyes. "I know," she whispered to them. "I know you're frightened. I know you want your mama. But she's not here, is she? So it's just us, just you and me, and that half-dead cowboy in my parlor." She picked up the first baby, the one with the slightly rounder face, and held her close, The infant's crying eased just a fraction, responding to warmth and human contact. "That's it, sweetheart. That's right." Jake returned with milk still warm from the cow and clean flour sacks that would have to serve as cloths. Together, they fashioned a makeshift feeding system, using strips of clean cloth soaked in milk. It wasn't ideal. Margaret knew the babies needed bottles, needed proper nursing, but it would keep them alive until she could figure out something better. She fed them slowly, carefully, making sure they didn't choke in their eagerness to eat. They were so hungry. How long had it been? And the first baby drank greedily, her tiny hands grasping at Margaret's fingers. As the second baby ate, Margaret finally let herself think about the man in her parlor. Who was he? Where had he come from? And whose babies were these? "Jake," she said quietly. "Check his pockets. See if there's anything that tells us who he is." The old cowhand nodded and disappeared. Margaret heard him moving around in the parlor, the rustle of cloth, the clink of something metal. When he came back, his face was grim. "Found this," he said, holding out a piece of paper folded many times and stained with dirt and blood. Margaret took it with trembling fingers, careful not to disturb the baby she was feeding. She unfolded it, and the handwriting that met her eyes was hurried, desperate, but clear enough to read. "Please, if someone finds them, their names are Rose and Lily Porter. Born March 20th, 1878. They are good babies. They deserve to live. Tell them their mama loved them. Tell them I'm sorry I couldn't protect them better. May God keep them safe." The note was signed with a shaking hand. Hannah Porter. Margaret's throat closed. She looked down at the baby in her arms. Rose or Lily, she didn't know which, and felt hot tears spill down her cheeks. "She knew," Margaret whispered. The mother knew she was going to die. She had just enough time to write this note and hide them. And then she died, trying to give them a chance. Jake's face was gray. "There's more, ma'am. That cowboy's got rope burns on his wrists, bruises all over, and his clothes are covered in blood that ain't his own." Margaret's head snapped up. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying he's been through hell. And those babies." Jake looked at the note in Margaret's hand. Whatever happened to their mama, he was there. He saw it. And then he brought them here. The baby finished eating, and Margaret lifted her to her shoulder, gently patting her back. The infant burped a surprisingly loud sound from such a tiny creature, and Margaret felt her lips twitch despite everything. "We need to know what happened," she said. "When he wakes up, we need to know." "If he wakes up," Jake said quietly. Margaret's hand stilled on the baby's back. "He'll wake up. He didn't ride all this way just to die on my sofa." But even as she said it, she wondered, how far had he ridden? And from what? The cowboy didn't wake up that night, or the next day, or the day after that. Doc Morrison came from town, examined him thoroughly, and shook his head with concern. "He's got no serious injuries that I can find. No broken bones, no bullet holes, just exhaustion. Pure and complete exhaustion. His body's shut down to heal. Could be a few days before he comes out of it." "But he will come out of it," Margaret pressed. "Can't say for certain, Mrs. Brennan. I've seen men sleep like this after extreme ordeals. Some wake up fine, some don't wake up at all." After the doctor left, Margaret sat beside the sofa with one baby in her arms. She'd decided this was Rose based on nothing but instinct, and watched the stranger's chest rise and fall. She'd cleaned him up as best she could with Jake's help, washing the dirt and blood from his face and hands, changing him into some of Thomas's old clothes. Beneath the grime, he was younger than she'd first thought. Couldn't be more than 28 or 29. He had a good face, even battered as it was. Strong jaw, straight nose, calloused hands that spoke of years of hard work, and those rope burns on his wrists. Jake had been right about those. Deep grooves recently healed. This man had been tied up probably not that long ago. "Who are you?" Margaret whispered, shifting Rose to her other arm. "And what did you see?" The twin babies had taken over her life in the space of 48 hours. She'd moved them into her bedroom, laying them in the top drawer of her dresser, just like her own mother had done with her siblings back in Ireland. The drawer fit them perfectly, lined with soft blankets. They ate every few hours, demanding and insistent. Margaret had sent Jake to the neighboring ranch to borrow nursing bottles, and Mrs. Henderson had sent over supplies with a note saying she'd come by in the morning to help. The whole territory would know by now. The widow Brennan, taking in 2 orphan babies and a half-dead cowboy. People would talk. They always did. Let them, Margaret thought fiercely. She'd stopped caring what people thought the day Thomas died, and the vultures started circling, offering to help by buying her land for pennies on the dollar. On the 3rd morning, Margaret was in the kitchen mixing milk for the babies when she heard a sound from the parlor. A groan. A sharp intake of breath. She set down the bottle and hurried to the doorway. The cowboy's eyes were open. Barely. And they were wild, unfocused, darting around the room like a cornered animal. "The babies," he gasped, trying to sit up. "Where are the babies?" "Easy, easy," Margaret said, moving quickly to his side. She pressed a gentle hand to his chest, pushing him back down. "They're safe. They're right here. Look." She pointed to the dresser drawer visible through her bedroom door, where both twins were sleeping peacefully. The cowboy's eyes followed her gesture, and when he saw the babies, his whole body seemed to deflate. He closed his eyes again, and tears leaked from the corners, tracking through the dirt, still on his face. "Save them," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Had to save them." "You did," Margaret said softly. "You saved them. They're alive because of you." "All dead," he mumbled, already sliding back toward unconsciousness. "Sweetwater Crossing. All dead. Only them left. Couldn't leave them. Couldn't." Then he was gone again, his breathing evening out into deep sleep. But Margaret stood frozen, her hand still on his chest, her heart hammering. Sweetwater Crossing. She knew that place. Everyone in the territory knew it. A treacherous ford on the Snake River about 40 miles northwest of here. It was a shortcut that wagon trains sometimes used, despite the danger. And this man had ridden 40 miles from there, in August heat, carrying 2 babies, without stopping. "Mother of God?" Margaret breathed, looking down at him with something like awe. "What kind of man are you?" She got her answer 2 days later when the cowboy finally woke up properly. Margaret was feeding Lily. She'd figured out which twin was which based on the tiny birthmark on Rose's left cheek when she heard movement from the parlor. "Mrs. Brennan," a voice called, rough as sandpaper but stronger than before. Margaret quickly put Lily in her cradle and hurried to the parlor. The cowboy was sitting up, his hand pressed to his head, his face still pale but much better than it had been. "You're awake," Margaret said, relief flooding through her. "Thank God. How do you feel?" "Like I've been trampled by a herd of buffalo," he said, then seemed to remember his manners. "Begging your pardon, ma'am. Don't mean to be crude." "After what you've been through, you're entitled," Margaret said. She poured him a glass of water from the pitcher on the side table. "Drink this, slowly." He took it gratefully, his hands shaking slightly. When he'd drained the glass, he looked up at her with eyes that were clear gray, direct, and honest. "Name's Daniel McAllister, ma'am, and I owe you a debt I can never repay for taking in those babies." "Margaret Brennan," she said. "This is my ranch, and you don't owe me anything, Mr. McAllister. You're the one who saved them." "How long have I been out?" 5 days. Daniel's eyes widened. 5 days, Jesus. I need to... He tried to stand, then swayed dangerously. Margaret caught his arm, steadying him. "You need to sit back down before you fall on your face," she said firmly. "The babies are fine. They're fed and clean and sleeping. You did your job. Now let me do mine." He sat, but reluctantly. "I need to tell someone what happened. The sheriff..." "We'll come when you're ready to talk," Margaret interrupted. "But first you need to eat something. When's the last time you had a proper meal?" Daniel frowned, thinking. Don't rightly remember. Before Sweetwater Crossing, I suppose. That's what I thought. Margaret moved toward the kitchen. I'll heat up some stew. And Mr. McAllister, you're going to tell me everything, every detail. Those babies deserve to have someone know their story. Yes, ma'am, Daniel said quietly. They do. Over the next hour, sitting at Margaret's kitchen table with a bowl of elk stew in front of him, Daniel McAllister told his story. And with every word, Margaret felt her blood run colder. I was working a ranch about 10 miles north of Sweetwater. He began eating slowly, as if his stomach had forgotten how to process food. Small outfit, just me and 2 other hands. Owner was back east visiting family. We were keeping watch over the herd. He paused, his jaw working. It was early morning, August 3rd. I was riding fence line when I heard gunshots. Lots of them. Rifle fire all at once, then screaming. Margaret's hands tightened on her coffee cup. I rode toward the sound, but careful-like. Didn't know what I was riding into. Got to the top of a ridge overlooking Sweetwater Crossing and saw... His voice broke. He cleared his throat, tried again. Saw a wagon stopped at the ford, 5 men on horses circling it. The people from the wagon were already down, already dead. Sweet Jesus, Margaret whispered. 3 men, 2 women. Daniel continued, his voice flat now, emotionless. Shot where they stood. The men who did it were going through the wagon, taking everything. I could hear them laughing about it. Did you recognize them? Daniel shook his head. Never seen them before. Had the look of drifters. Maybe Confederate deserters. Hard men, the kind who'd kill for $1 or for sport. He took a shaky breath. I had my rifle. Could have taken one of them maybe. But there were 5 of them, and 1 of me. If I tried, I'd be dead, and then nobody would know what happened. Nobody would be able to tell. You did the right thing, Margaret said firmly. 5 to 1 are suicide odds. Didn't feel right, though, Daniel said bitterly. Sitting up on that ridge watching them desecrate those people's belongings, their bodies lying right there in the sun. He drank more water, his hand steadier now. Eventually they rode off, heading west. I waited another hour to make sure they were really gone. Then I went down to see if anyone had survived. Margaret could see him gathering himself for what came next, building up the courage to speak the worst of it. They were all dead, he said finally. Quick kills, most of them. Shot clean through. One of the men had a watch that said, "To Samuel on our wedding day." Another had letters addressed to someone in Kansas. They were settlers, Mrs. Brennan. Just ordinary people heading west looking for land to homestead. The baby's parents, Margaret asked gently. Samuel and Hannah Porter. Daniel pulled the note from his pocket. Margaret had washed it and returned it to him. I found their names in a Bible in the wagon. Young couple. Couldn't have been married more than 3 years. He looked up at Margaret, and she saw the grief in his eyes, the guilt. I checked all the bodies. Made sure there was nothing I could do. Then I heard it, just the tiniest sound. Like a kitten mewing. Took me a minute to figure out where it was coming from. The babies were hidden, Margaret said, remembering the note. Daniel nodded. Under the wagon floorboards. There was a hidden compartment, real clever-like, under the driver's seat. Someone had pried it open just enough to shove something inside, then pushed it closed again. I got my knife out and worked it open. His voice softened. And there they were. 2 little babies wrapped up tight in that shawl, with that note pinned to the blanket. They looked at me with those big eyes, not crying anymore, just waiting. Like they knew they had to stay quiet to stay alive. Margaret felt tears prick her eyes. Hannah must have heard the riders coming. Must have had just enough time to hide them and write that note before she died, trying to protect them. Daniel finished. Yes, ma'am. That's exactly what happened. They sat in silence for a moment, both thinking about a young mother's desperate last act. Why did you bring them here? Margaret asked finally. Town was closer, wasn't it? Or the ranch you were working? Daniel looked uncomfortable. Town was about the same distance, but I didn't know who I could trust. Those outlaws, they might have had friends, might have been watching the roads. And the ranch I was working, the owner wasn't there. Just me and two hands, and neither of them had families. No women to help with babies. He met her eyes. But I'd heard of you, Mrs. Brennan. The widow running a ranch by herself. People in town talk about you. Some of it ain't kind, but all of it agrees on one thing: you're strong, fair. Don't turn away from hard things. Margaret felt heat rise to her cheeks. You rode 40 miles based on gossip. I rode 40 miles based on instinct, Daniel corrected, and desperation. Those babies needed help fast. They needed someone who'd know what to do. And when I thought about who that might be, your face was the one that came to mind. You'd never even met me. No, ma'am, but I'd seen you. In town at the supply store. Way you carried yourself. Way you didn't back down when that cattle buyer tried to cheat you on prices. Way you helped that Mexican family when their wagon broke down, even though people whispered you shouldn't. Margaret looked away, embarrassed. She'd forgotten about that. It had seemed like nothing at the time. You don't see yourself clear, Mrs. Brennan, Daniel said quietly. But others do. And I saw someone I could trust with 2 orphaned babies. Someone who'd care more about doing right than about convenience or propriety. Well, Margaret said, her voice rough with emotion. You were right about that part, at least. A cry came from the bedroom. Rose, probably. She always woke first. Daniel's head snapped toward the sound, his whole body tensing. They're fine, Margaret assured him. Just hungry again. Babies eat constantly. Can I? Daniel hesitated. Can I see them? Hold them? Margaret smiled. They're as much yours as mine, Mr. McAllister. You're the one who saved them. She brought out Rose first, the baby squirming and fussy in that way that meant, feed me immediately. Daniel took her carefully, his big scarred hands gentle, and looked down at her with an expression Margaret couldn't quite name. Wonder, maybe, or grief, or both, mixed together. Hello, Rose, he murmured. Remember me. I'm the fellow who carried you 40 miles. You probably don't, do you? You were too busy screaming your head off. Despite everything, Margaret laughed. They're good at that. She went back for Lily, and soon they were both sitting at the kitchen table, each holding a baby, preparing bottles. It should have felt awkward, a widow and a stranger playing at family. But somehow it didn't. It felt natural. Right. What happens now? Daniel asked, watching as Rose latched onto the bottle with fierce determination. Now we notify the sheriff, Margaret said. See if those outlaws can be tracked, and we try to find out if Rose and Lily have any other family, anyone who might want them. And if they don't? Margaret looked down at Lily, at her perfect little face, and felt that crack in her chest widen a little more. Then I suppose they stay here, with me. And me, Daniel said firmly. I'm not leaving them, Mrs. Brennan. Those babies and I, we've been through something together. That creates a bond. I need to make sure they're all right. You planning on settling here then? Margaret asked, surprised. Giving up the drifting life? Daniel was quiet for a long moment, looking at Rose. I've been drifting since the war ended. Thought I was looking for something but never found it. Maybe because I was looking in the wrong places. He glanced up at Margaret. Maybe what I was looking for was a reason to stop. Their eyes met across the table, and Margaret felt something pass between them. Not romance, it was too soon for that, too raw. But something. Understanding, maybe. Recognition. 2 broken people finding purpose in saving 2 innocent lives. Well then, Margaret said, clearing her throat. I suppose I could use another hand around the ranch, if you're willing to work for wages and room and board. I'm willing, Daniel said immediately. And Mrs. Brennan, thank you, for taking them in, for taking me in, for being the person I hoped you'd be. Don't thank me yet, Margaret said with a slight smile. You haven't seen how much work a ranch takes, or how often babies wake up screaming in the middle of the night. I'll manage, Daniel said. And looking at him, at the determination in his gray eyes, Margaret believed him. Outside, the Wyoming sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Inside, 2 babies drank their bottles content and safe. And 2 adults sat together in the gathering dusk, beginning to understand that sometimes the worst tragedies can birth the most unexpected grace. The journey was just beginning. But for the first time in years, Margaret Brennan felt something she'd thought lost forever. Hope. Sheriff Henry Porter arrived 3 days later, and the moment Margaret opened the door and saw his face, she knew something was terribly wrong. He stood on her porch with his hat in his hands, his weathered features carved deep with grief, and when he looked past her to where Daniel sat holding Rose, his composure crumbled. "Those are my brother's children," Henry said, his voice breaking on the last word. "Samuel's girls, Rose and Lily." Margaret's hand flew to her mouth. "You're their uncle." "I'm all they have left in this world." Henry stepped inside without invitation, his eyes fixed on the babies. "Samuel was my younger brother. Only family I had after Ma and Pa passed. He married Hannah 3 years back, moved to Kansas to try farming. They were heading back here when—" He couldn't finish. Daniel stood slowly, careful with Rose. "Sheriff, I'm the one who found them. Found your brother and his wife, too. I'm sorry. I'm so damn sorry." Henry's jaw worked, emotions warring across his face. Then he crossed the room in 3 strides and did something Margaret didn't expect. He grabbed Daniel's shoulder, gripped it hard. "You saved them," Henry said roughly. "Samuel would thank you. Hannah would thank you. I'm thanking you now. I only did what anyone would." "No." Henry cut him off. "Most men would have ridden past, or taken them to the nearest town and dropped them with strangers. You rode 40 miles in August, heat carrying 2 babies. That ain't what anyone would do. That's what a good man does." Daniel looked down, uncomfortable with praise. Margaret moved quickly to break the tension. "Sit down, Sheriff. Please. I'll make coffee. You'll want to hold them properly." Over the next hour, Henry Porter told them about Samuel and Hannah, how they'd met at a church social, how Hannah had been orphaned young, raised by her aunt in Boston, how Samuel had written letters every week after they married full of hope about their farm, about the twins being born, about coming home to Wyoming once they had enough saved. "They were good people," Henry said, cradling Lily against his chest, while tears ran unchecked down his weathered face. "Never hurt nobody, just wanted a piece of land and a quiet life." "Did they have other family?" Margaret asked gently. "Anyone who might want the girls." Henry's expression darkened. "Hannah's got an aunt. Victoria Ashford, lives in Boston. Rich as Croesus and twice as cold. She wrote to Samuel once after the wedding, said Hannah had married beneath herself. Didn't even send a gift when the twins were born." "Then she has no claim," Margaret said firmly. "Law might see it different," Henry said. "Victoria Ashford's got money and connections. If she decides she wants these babies, she could make trouble." Daniel leaned forward. "Would she want them if she cut Hannah off for marrying a farmer?" "Don't know," Henry admitted. "But Hannah was her only niece. Sometimes people get sentimental about blood, even when they treated that blood like dirt when it was alive." Margaret felt ice in her stomach. "What are you saying, Henry?" The sheriff looked at her, and his eyes were full of resignation. "I'm saying I need to send word to Boston. Let Victoria know what happened. It's the legal thing to do, even if it ain't the smart thing. And if she comes for them, then we deal with it." Henry's voice hardened. "But those babies ain't going nowhere until I'm convinced it's what's best for them, blood relation or no." After Henry left, promising to return the next day with legal papers for temporary guardianship, Margaret stood at the window watching the dust from his horse settle. Daniel came up behind her so close she could feel the heat from his body. "This ain't over," he said quietly. "No." Margaret pressed her hand against the glass. "It's just beginning." That night, Margaret couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, listening to the twins breathe their small sounds filling the darkness of her room. Rose snored slightly, a tiny piglet sound that made Margaret's chest ache. Lily was quieter, just soft sighs. They'd been here a week, only a week. But already Margaret couldn't imagine the house without them. Couldn't imagine waking up without their cries demanding attention. Couldn't imagine the silence that would come if someone took them away. She'd lost Patrick 3 years ago, watched fever burn through his small body while she prayed desperately to a God who didn't seem to be listening. Held him while he struggled to breathe, his blue eyes going glassy and distant. Buried him under the cottonwood tree and felt something inside her die with him. She couldn't do it again, couldn't lose more children, couldn't survive it. Mrs. Brennan. Daniel's voice came from the hallway, soft and uncertain. You awake? Come in, Margaret said, not caring about propriety. Not now. He appeared in the doorway, fully dressed, despite the hour. Heard you moving around. Thought maybe the babies needed something. They're fine. Margaret sat up, pulling her shawl around her shoulders. I'm the one who's not fine. Daniel came closer, hesitant. In the moonlight through the window, his face was all shadows and sharp lines. You're thinking about the aunt, about losing them. How did you know? Because I'm thinking the same thing. He sat on the edge of her bed, scandalous, but neither of them cared. Those babies, they got under my skin somehow. Made me think about things I gave up thinking about after the war. What things? Family. Home. A reason to stay in one place. He looked at the twins sleeping in their drawer. I got no right to them, Mrs. Brennan. No blood claim. But I feel responsible. Like they're mine to protect. They are, Margaret said fiercely. You saved them. That makes them yours as much as blood would. Law won't see it that way. Then damn the law. The words came out harsh, surprising both of them. Margaret took a breath. I'm sorry. I lost my son 3 years ago. Fever took him. And my husband died in a stampede 8 months back. I've got nothing left except this ranch and those 2 babies. I won't let some Boston society woman take them just because she shares blood with their dead mother. Daniel was quiet for a long moment. Then he said something that changed everything. What if you weren't alone? What if you had a husband, a partner who could help fight for them? Margaret's heart stopped. What are you saying? I'm saying the law respects married couples more than widows. Daniel turned to face her fully. I'm saying if we were married, we'd have a stronger claim. 2-parent stable home working ranch. Hard to argue against that. You're proposing we marry for the babies. I'm proposing we marry because it makes sense. He spoke carefully, choosing words. I need a place to belong. You need help with the ranch and someone to stand with you when that aunt shows up. The babies need 2 parents who'll fight for them. We could help each other. Margaret's mind raced. It was insane. They barely knew each other. She'd been widowed less than a year. People would talk. Let them talk, she thought viciously. Let them all talk while I keep these babies safe. All right, she heard herself say. All right, yes. We'll marry. Soon as it can be arranged. Daniel's eyes widened. You mean it. I mean it. Margaret extended her hand, formal and strange. Partners then, for the baby's sake. He took her hand, his grip warm and calloused. Partners. They shook on it like men making a business deal, and maybe that's all it was. But when Daniel left her room, Margaret sat in the darkness and wondered what she'd just agreed to. Marriage to a stranger. A man she'd known for 8 days. A cowboy who'd ridden out of nowhere, carrying orphaned babies and a story full of blood. But he'd saved them, and he was willing to fight for them. That had to count for something. In the morning, Margaret told old Jake to ride to town and fetch Preacher Gibson. The old ranch hand's eyebrows climbed to his hairline. You're marrying him, that drifter. That drifter saved 2 babies' lives. Margaret said coldly. And he's agreed to stay and help with the ranch. We're getting married today, Jake. You can accept it or pack your things. Jake held up his hands. Didn't mean no offense, Mrs. Brennan. Just surprised is all. Mighty quick. When you're my age, you don't waste time. Margaret softened slightly. I need this, Jake. For the babies. For the ranch. For myself. Can you understand that? The old cowhand studied her face, then nodded slowly. I reckon I can. Your business is your business. I'll fetch the preacher. 3 hours later, Margaret Brennan stood in her parlor wearing her green dress, the one she'd worn to marry Thomas 9 years ago, and spoke vows for the second time in her life. Preacher Gibson looked concerned, kept asking if she was certain, but Margaret's voice never wavered. I, Margaret Brennan, take you Daniel McAllister to be my lawfully wedded husband, to have and hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and health, until death do us part. Daniel's vows were steady too, his gray eyes serious. When Preacher Gibson pronounced them husband and wife, Daniel kissed her brief and formal, more seal than sentiment. But his hand on her waist was gentle, and Margaret felt something shift inside her chest. Fear, maybe, or hope, or both tangled together. Henry Porter arrived an hour after the ceremony, and his expression when he learned they'd married was complicated. Relief mixed with suspicion. That was fast, he said, looking between them. Awful fast, Mrs. Brennan. Mrs. McAllister? Fast doesn't mean wrong, Margaret said. Daniel and I decided we want to raise Rose and Lily together, as a family. That a problem, Sheriff? Henry rubbed his jaw. No, ma'am. Actually makes my job easier. Married couples got better legal standing than a widow alone. He paused. You planning to adopt them legal, soon as it can be arranged? Daniel set his hand, finding Margaret's shoulder. Those girls are ours now. We aim to make it official. Good. Henry pulled papers from his coat. Because I sent a telegram to Boston yesterday, told Victoria Ashford what happened. She wired back this morning. She's coming. The words dropped like stones in still water. Margaret felt her blood run cold. When? Left yesterday on the eastbound train. Be here in 5 days, give or take. Henry's face was grim. She said she's claiming custody of her niece's children. Said she's their rightful guardian as closest living relation. She's not their guardian, Margaret said, her voice shaking with fury. She cut Hannah off, treated her like trash for marrying a farmer. She's got no right. She's got blood right, Henry interrupted. And money for lawyers. You need to be prepared, Margaret. Victoria Ashford's not someone who takes no for an answer. After Henry left, Margaret stood in the kitchen with her fists clenched, shaking with rage and fear. Daniel came up behind her, his presence solid and warm. We'll fight her, he said quietly. We're married now. We've got legal standing. You don't know Boston society women, Margaret said bitterly. I've seen her kind. All polish and money and connections. She'll look at this ranch and see poverty. She'll look at me and see an Irish immigrant who doesn't belong. She'll take them, Daniel. She'll take them, and there's nothing we can do. Then we make sure she doesn't. Daniel turned her around, his hands on her shoulders. Listen to me. We've got 5 days. 5 days to show we're a real family. That these babies are loved and safe here. That we're the best thing for them. And if that's not enough... His jaw set hard. Then we make it enough. The next 4 days passed in a blur of preparation and growing dread. Margaret cleaned the house until it gleamed, desperate to make it presentable for Boston eyes. Daniel worked from dawn to dusk, fixing every broken fence and sagging beam, making the ranch look prosperous even when money was tight. They cared for Rose and Lily together, falling into a rhythm that felt almost natural. Daniel was surprisingly good with the babies, gentle and patient in a way that made Margaret's heart ache. He sang to them in a low voice, old war songs turned into lullabies. He walked the floor with them when they cried at night. He changed diapers without complaint. And slowly, carefully, Margaret began to see him as more than just a stranger she'd married out of desperation. She saw the way his face softened when he held the babies, the way he fixed things around the house without being asked, the way he deferred to her on decisions but stood firm when he disagreed. He was a good man, maybe even a great one. On the third night, they sat on the porch after the babies were asleep, the Wyoming darkness thick around them. Daniel was whittling a piece of wood, making toys for the twins, he'd said. Margaret watched his hands move, sure and skilled. "What happened to you in the war?" she asked suddenly. His hands stilled. "Why do you want to know?" "Because I'm your wife now, even if it's just on paper. I should know." Daniel was quiet so long, Margaret thought he wouldn't answer. Then he said, "I was at Gettysburg, third day, Pickett's charge. We went up that hill knowing we were going to die, but we went anyway because those were the orders." "You survived." "My whole unit didn't." His voice was flat. "I watched boys I'd grown up with get cut down like wheat. Watched them scream for their mothers while they bled out in the grass. And I kept walking, kept firing, kept surviving when better men died." "That's not your fault." "Ain't it?" He looked at her, and his eyes were full of old pain. "I lived, Mrs. McAllister. I lived when I didn't deserve to. That's a debt I've been trying to pay ever since." Margaret understood then. Understood why he'd saved the babies. Why he'd ridden 40 miles half dead from exhaustion. Why he was willing to marry a stranger and fight for children who weren't his own. He was trying to balance the scales. Trying to save enough lives to make up for the ones he couldn't save. "Those babies are alive because of you," Margaret said softly. "That's not a debt. That's grace." Daniel's throat worked. "Don't know if I believe in grace anymore." "Then believe in them." Margaret gestured toward the house where Rose and Lily slept. "Believe in what we're building here. It might not be what either of us planned, but it's good. It's real. And it's worth fighting for." He looked at her for a long moment, something shifting in his expression. "You're remarkable. You know that most women would have turned me away. But you took in a stranger and 2 babies without hesitation. Let me into your home. Married me to save them. You're the bravest person I've ever met." Margaret felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I'm not brave. I'm just stubborn." "Same thing sometimes." Daniel smiled, and it transformed his face. Made him look younger, less haunted. "I'm glad I brought them here. Glad I found you." "So am I," Margaret said, and realized she meant it. They sat in comfortable silence after that, listening to the prairie sounds. And for the first time since Thomas died, Margaret didn't feel alone. Victoria Ashford arrived on the 5th day in a black carriage that looked absurdly fancy against the rough Wyoming landscape. She stepped out in silk morning dress that probably cost more than Margaret's entire wardrobe, her face pale and pinched her eyes cold as winter ice. "Mrs. McAllister," she said, looking Margaret up and down with barely concealed disdain. "I'm Victoria Ashford, Hannah Porter's aunt. I've come for my nieces." Margaret's spine straightened. "You mean you've come to meet your nieces? They're not going anywhere." Victoria's lips thinned. "We'll see about that. Where are they?" "Sleeping," Daniel said, appearing at Margaret's side. His presence was deliberately intimidating, tall, broad-shouldered, protective. "And they'll stay sleeping. Babies need their rest. And you are Daniel McAllister, Margaret's husband, and Rose and Lily's father, legal guardian as of 3 days ago." Victoria's eyes widened. "Father? You've known these children for less than 2 weeks, and you claim to be their father." "I'm the man who saved them," Daniel said coldly. "I'm the man who found them after outlaws murdered their parents. I'm the man who rode 40 miles carrying them to safety. So yes, ma'am, I claim to be their father." For a moment, Victoria looked genuinely shaken. Then she composed herself, pulled out a handkerchief, dabbed at eyes that showed no tears. "How tragic. Poor Hannah. Poor Samuel. But that doesn't change the facts. Those children are my blood. They belong with me in Boston, where they can have proper education, proper society, proper opportunities. They belong here, Margaret said firmly, with people who love them. Love? Victoria laughed brittle and harsh. My dear love doesn't put food on the table or prepare children for civilized society. Those babies are Ashfords. They have a legacy, a position to maintain. You can't give them that in this. She gestured dismissively at the ranch, wilderness. Maybe not, Margaret agreed. But we can give them something more important. A home, a family. People who chose them not out of obligation, but because we love them. Victoria's expression hardened. I'm not arguing about this. I've already contacted my lawyers. I have legal right as closest blood relative. Unless you can prove unfit guardianship, those children are coming with me. Then prove we're unfit, Daniel challenged. Stay a few days. Watch how we care for them. See if you can find one reason why they'd be better off in Boston than here. It was a risk, a terrible risk. But Victoria's eyes narrowed, calculating. Very well. I'll stay 3 days. But Mr. McAllister, when I leave, those babies are coming with me. Count on it. She swept inside, and Margaret and Daniel exchanged glances. The war had begun. The next 3 days were the most tense of Margaret's life. Victoria watched everything with those cold eyes, making notes in a little leather book. She criticized the makeshift cradle. Dresser drawers are not appropriate sleeping arrangements for Ashford children. She questioned their feeding schedule. You're holding them too much, you'll spoil them. She examined the house with visible disdain. Rather rustic, isn't it? But she couldn't fault their care of the babies. Daniel and Margaret worked seamlessly together, anticipating each other's needs, dividing tasks without discussion. They fed Rose and Lily on schedule, changed them promptly, rocked them when they fussed. The twins were thriving, gaining weight, sleeping better, smiling more, and they responded to Daniel and Margaret in ways they didn't respond to Victoria. When Victoria tried to hold Rose, the baby cried and reached for Daniel. When Victoria attempted to feed Lily, the infant refused the bottle until Margaret took over. It was clear, painfully clear, that these babies knew who their parents were, and it wasn't the cold Boston aunt who'd never even sent a gift when they were born. On the second night, Margaret found Victoria standing over the twins' cradle, her face twisted with something that might have been grief. They look like her, Victoria whispered. Hannah, they have her eyes. Margaret came closer, cautious. You loved her. She was my sister's only child. After my sister died, Hannah was all I had left. Victoria's voice cracked slightly. I raised her, gave her everything, and she threw it away to marry a farmer. A man with no prospects, no connections, no future. I was so angry. Angry enough to cut her off. I thought she'd come back. Victoria turned to face Margaret, and her eyes were wet now, actually wet. I thought when she realized how hard frontier life was, she'd come crawling back. But she didn't. She was happy with Samuel. Happy in a way I never understood. And now she's dead, and I never... Her voice broke. I never told her I was sorry. Margaret felt unexpected sympathy stir. You're not trying to save the babies. You're trying to save your relationship with Hannah. Perhaps. Victoria wiped her eyes roughly. But that doesn't change the facts. Those babies deserve better than this. They deserve education, culture, opportunities that this ranch can't provide. They deserve love, Margaret said firmly. And we love them. Not because of who their mother was, not because of blood or obligation, but because they're Rose and Lily, and they're precious and they're ours. Victoria looked at her for a long moment. You really believe you can give them a good life here? I know I can. Margaret moved to the cradle, adjusting Lily's blanket with tender hands. I lost my son 3 years ago. Fever took him. For 3 years, I've been half alive, just going through motions. These babies gave me back my life, Victoria. They gave me a reason to wake up in the morning, to hope again, to love again. You can't put a price on that. But can you give them piano lessons? Dancing instruction. Introduction to proper society. I can give them the prairie sky and the sound of horses running and the freedom to be themselves without worrying about propriety. Margaret's voice strengthened. I can teach them to ride and shoot and run a ranch. I can teach them to be strong and independent and brave. I can teach them that family isn't just blood. It's the people who choose you and fight for you and love you no matter what. Victoria was silent. Then she said quietly, Hannah would have liked you. I wish I'd known her. She was like you, stubborn, independent, refused to be what society wanted her to be. Victoria smiled sadly. I tried to mold her into a proper Boston lady. She wanted to be a frontier wife. We were both too proud to compromise. Don't make the same mistake with her daughters, Margaret urged. Don't try to turn them into something they're not. Let them grow up here where they're loved and safe. You can still be part of their lives, still be Aunt Victoria. But don't take them from the only home they've known. Victoria turned back to the cradle, watching Rose and Lily sleep. When she spoke again, her voice was barely audible. I'm not taking them. Margaret's heart stopped. What? I said, I'm not taking them. Victoria faced her, and there were tears on her cheeks now. You're right. I'm trying to save something that's already dead. Hannah made her choice. She chose this life, this land, this kind of love. Who am I to say her daughters should choose differently? Victoria. But I want to be part of their lives. Victoria's voice turned fierce. I want letters, photographs. I want to visit every year. I want to know them, Margaret. They're all I have left of Hannah. Yes, Margaret said immediately. Yes, of course. You're their aunt, your family. You'll always be welcome here. Victoria nodded, composing herself with visible effort. I'll return to Boston tomorrow. I'll write to you weekly, and I'll expect the same from you. I want to watch them grow, even if it's from a distance. You will, Margaret promised. They'll know their Aunt Victoria. They'll know you loved their mother. They'll know everything good about Hannah, I swear it. After Victoria left the room, Margaret sagged against the wall, overwhelmed with relief. They'd won. Against all odds, they'd won. Daniel found her there moments later. I heard, he said softly. She's really leaving without them. She's leaving. Margaret looked up at him, tears streaming down her face. They're ours, Daniel. Really and truly ours. He pulled her into his arms, and for the first time since they'd married, it felt real. Not a business arrangement, not a marriage of convenience, but something deeper, something that mattered. We did it, he murmured into her hair. We saved them. We saved each other, Margaret corrected, holding him tight. All four of us. They stood like that for a long time, wrapped in each other, while their daughters slept peacefully nearby. And in that moment, Margaret understood something profound. Family wasn't about blood. It wasn't about law or society or proper arrangements. It was about this two broken people and two orphaned babies choosing each other when they could have walked away, building something beautiful from tragedy, creating love where there should have been only loss. Outside, the Wyoming night spread wide and dark, full of stars and promise. Inside, a new family slept under one roof, bound together by choice and courage, and the simple, miraculous act of refusing to give up. The worst was over. Or so Margaret thought. But she didn't know about the 5 riders heading toward her ranch from the west, their faces hard with murder, their purpose clear. Malcolm Wade and his men were coming to finish what they'd started at Sweetwater Crossing. And this time, there would be no survivors. Victoria's carriage had been gone less than an hour when old Jake burst through the kitchen door, his weathered face gray with fear. Mrs. McAllister, we got trouble. 5 riders coming in from the northwest moving deliberate. They ain't friendly. Margaret's blood turned to ice. She was holding Lily, had just finished feeding her. Daniel was in the barn with Rose, showing her the new foal. They were scattered, vulnerable. How far out? Maybe 20 minutes if they keep that pace, but ma'am, Jake's voice dropped. I recognized one of them through the spyglass. Got a scar across his left eye, rides a black stallion. That's Malcolm Wade. He's wanted in 3 territories for murder and worse. The bowl Margaret was holding slipped from her fingers, shattered on the floor. Malcolm Wade. She knew that name. Everyone in Wyoming knew that name. Confederate deserter turned outlaw, killed for pleasure as much as profit. Get Daniel, she said, her voice surprisingly steady. Get all the men to the house, now. And Jake, bring every gun we have. Jake ran. Margaret carried Lily to the bedroom, laid her carefully in the dresser drawer next to Rose, who Daniel must have brought in moments before. Both babies were drowsy, content, unaware that death was riding toward them. Stay quiet, my darlings, Margaret whispered, her hands shaking as she tucked blankets around them. Please stay quiet. Daniel appeared in the doorway, his face hard. Jake told me. This is about Sweetwater Crossing. They're coming to silence the witness. They're coming to kill us all. Margaret moved past him, heading for the gun cabinet. How many rounds do we have? Not enough. Daniel was already loading rifles with practiced efficiency. We've got maybe 40 rounds total between 3 rifles and 2 pistols. 5 men against 5 of us if you count Miguel and Charlie, but they're ranch hands, not fighters. They'll fight. Margaret checked the load on Thomas's old Henry rifle, the one he'd carried through the war. Her hands remembered the motions even though her heart was hammering. They'll fight or they'll die. Margaret! Daniel caught her arm, turned her to face him. Take the babies and run. Out the back, take the fastest horse ride to town. I'll hold them off as long as I can. Like hell! She jerked free, her eyes blazing. This is my ranch, my home. Those are my daughters. I'm not running. You could die. Then I die protecting what's mine. Margaret moved to the window, peering through the curtain. But I'm not planning on dying today, Daniel McAllister. I'm planning on those bastards dying instead. Despite everything, Daniel's lips twitched. You're terrifying when you're angry, you know that. Good. Maybe Wade will think twice before attacking a terrifying Irish woman. But the brief moment of levity vanished as hoofbeats sounded in the distance. They were coming. Jake, Miguel, and Charlie crowded into the parlor, all armed, all scared, but trying not to show it. Daniel positioned them at windows, 2 upstairs, 3 down. Margaret took the window facing the front approach, her rifle steady on the sill. Nobody fires until I do, Daniel commanded, his voice carrying the authority of a man who'd led soldiers into battle. Conserve ammunition. Make every shot count. And if they get inside... He looked at Margaret. You take the babies and run. Don't argue, just run. They won't get inside, Margaret said flatly. Not while I'm breathing. The riders appeared over the rise, 5 dark shapes against the afternoon sun. They came slowly, confidently, men who'd done this before and expected no real resistance. Malcolm Wade rode in front on his black stallion, his scarred face visible even at this distance. They stopped about 50 yards out, just beyond easy rifle range. Wade raised his hand, and his men fanned out in a loose semicircle, blocking any escape. Daniel McAllister. Wade's voice carried clearly across the yard. Know you're in there, boy. Saw you at Sweetwater. You're the witness who's gonna hang us all. Can't let that happen. Daniel didn't respond, just kept his rifle trained on Wade's chest. Don't have to be like this, Wade continued. You come out peaceful, we'll make it quick. Your woman and those babies, they can live. Got no quarrel with them, just you. He's lying, Margaret whispered. He'll kill us all. I know. Daniel's jaw was tight. They can't leave witnesses. So give me up, Wade shouted, or we'll burn you out. Choice is yours, but either way, you're dying today. From upstairs, Rose began to cry. The sound pierced through the tense silence, a baby's wail that carried out through the open windows. Wade's scarred face split into a grin. Well now, that's interesting. You got babies in there, McAllister? That the Porter twins? The ones we missed? Daniel's finger tightened on the trigger. Margaret could see the rage building in him, barely controlled. Should have let them die with their parents, Wade called out. Would have been kinder. Now they get to watch their new daddy die before we finish the job properly. That's it, Daniel muttered, and fired. The shot took Wade's hat clean off, sent it spinning into the dirt. The outlaw's grin vanished, replaced by cold fury. Bad choice, boy. Red Tom torched the barn. Ben Snake, you're with me. Let's smoke them out. 3 men split off toward the barn, while Wade and another rider charged straight for the house. Margaret fired again. This time her bullet caught the rider next to Wade in the shoulder, sent him tumbling from his saddle with a scream. Got him! She shouted, already working the lever action for another round. Daniel's rifle cracked twice in quick succession. One of the men heading for the barn dropped. The other 2 made it to the structure, and moments later, smoke began rising. They're burning us out, Jake yelled from upstairs. The barn's going up. Let it burn, Daniel said coldly. We saved the house and the babies. Everything else is just wood. Wade had dismounted, was using his dead horse as cover. He fired at the house, and the window next to Margaret's head exploded. Glass rained down on her, cutting her cheek. She didn't flinch, just shifted position and fired back. How many rounds left? Daniel called out. Maybe 20. Charlie answered from the kitchen window. We're burning through them fast. Then make them count. Every shot has to land. Rose was screaming now, and Lily had joined her. The sound of terrified babies filled the house, and Margaret felt rage build in her chest like a living thing. These men had murdered the twins' parents, had tried to leave them to die in the wilderness, and now they were here to finish what they'd started. Not while I'm breathing, Margaret thought savagely and fired again. This time she hit Wade's cover horse, made the carcass jump. Close. Miguel, Charlie, concentrate on the barn, Daniel ordered. Don't let them get back to cover. The 2 men at the barn were trying to work their way back to their horses. Miguel's rifle barked once, twice. One man fell, didn't get up. The other made it to his horse, started to mount, and Jake's shot from upstairs took him in the back. He hung over the saddle for a moment, then slid to the ground. That left Wade and one other man. But Wade was the dangerous one. He moved like a predator, quick and smart, using cover effectively. He'd worked his way closer to the house, was now behind the water trough, only 30 yards out. He's going to rush the door, Daniel said. Margaret, cover me. I'm going out. You're insane. He gets inside, we're all dead. I know men like him. Won't stop until the job's done. Daniel moved toward the door, checked his pistol. Keep firing. Make him keep his head down. And if I don't? He looked at her, and his eyes were full of things unsaid. Take care of them. The babies. You're the only mother they'll ever remember. Daniel, don't. But he was already moving, threw open the door, and rolled out, firing as he went. Wade returned fire, and Margaret saw splinters explode from the doorframe inches from Daniel's head. She fired, worked the lever, fired again, giving Daniel covering fire as he made it to the porch railing. The last standing outlaw broke from cover, trying to flank Daniel. Margaret tracked him, led his movement, and squeezed the trigger. The man went down hard, his rifle flying from his hands. That left Wade. The outlaw stood up from behind the water trough, his pistol raised, aiming straight at Daniel's back. Margaret saw it happening in slow motion, saw Wade's finger tightening on the trigger, saw Daniel turning, but not fast enough. She didn't think, just moved, threw herself through the broken window, landed hard on the porch, and fired from the ground. The shot went wild, hit the water trough, but it made Wade flinch, made him turn his aim toward her instead of Daniel. Time froze. Margaret saw Wade's scarred face, saw his pistol pointed at her chest, saw his fingers squeeze. She couldn't move fast enough, couldn't do anything but watch her death coming. The shot was deafening. But it wasn't Wade's pistol. It was Daniel's rifle, fired from 5 feet away, the muzzle almost touching Wade's chest. The outlaw staggered backward, shock on his face, and fell. Daniel was at Margaret's side in an instant, pulling her up, checking her for wounds. Are you hurt? Margaret, answer me. Are you hurt? I'm fine." Her voice came out shaky. "Is he? He's dead. They're all dead." Daniel pulled her against his chest, his arms tight around her. "You stupid brave woman. You could have been killed." "So could you." Margaret's hands fisted in his shirt. "You were going to sacrifice yourself. Let him kill you to protect us." "I'm expendable. You and those babies aren't." "You're not expendable to me." The words came out fierce, surprising both of them. "You're my husband, Daniel, the father of my children. You don't get to die and leave us alone. You don't get to make that choice." Daniel pulled back far enough to see her face. "Margaret!" Whatever he was going to say was cut off by Jake's shout from inside. "Mrs. McAllister, the barn. We need water chains now." They ran. The barn was fully engulfed, flames licking at the roof. If it spread to the hay storage or the bunkhouse, they'd lose everything. "Everyone who can walk get buckets," Daniel shouted. "Form a chain from the well. Move." They worked frantically, passing buckets of water, throwing them on the flames. Miguel had taken a bullet in the leg, but refused to stop working. Charlie's hands were blistered from heat. Jake moved like a man half his age, driven by desperation. And Margaret, her dress torn and bloodstained. Her face cut from flying glass, worked alongside them. Filled buckets passed them down the line, ignored the pain in her hands and the exhaustion pulling at her. The babies were crying inside the house, terrified and confused, but she couldn't go to them. Not yet. Not until the fire was contained. It took 2 hours. 2 brutal, exhausting hours of fighting flames, while bodies lay scattered in the yard and smoke choked the air. But finally, the fire died. The barn was a blackened shell, but it hadn't spread. The house stood intact. They'd survived. Margaret staggered inside her hands, shaking so badly, she could barely hold the dipper of water Daniel pressed on her. She drank, then moved on autopilot to the bedroom where Rose and Lily were screaming their fury at being ignored. I'm here, she murmured, gathering them both into her arms. "Mama's here now. You're safe." They were wet, hungry, and furious, but whole, alive. Margaret sank to the floor with them rocking them both, and let herself cry for the first time since the shooting started. Daniel found her there an hour later, still on the floor, the twins finally settled and sleeping against her chest. He lowered himself beside her. With a grunt of pain, he'd been hit after all bullet graze across his ribs that he'd said nothing about. "Miguel's leg wound is clean. Doc Morrison already came and patched him up," Daniel said quietly. "Charlie's hands will heal. Jake's fine, just tired. The outlaws are all dead. Sheriff's taking the bodies to town, filing reports. It's over." "Is it?" Margaret looked at him, her eyes hollow. "Will there be more? More men coming for revenge?" "No." Daniel's voice was certain. "Wade's gang is finished, and word will spread fast. Don't mess with the McAllisters. We took down 5 armed outlaws. People will think twice." "I killed a man today." Margaret's voice was barely a whisper. "Shot him off his horse. Watched him fall. I didn't even hesitate. You protected your family." Daniel's hand found hers, squeezed gently. "That's not murder. That's survival. That's love." Thomas would be ashamed. He hated violence, hated killing even during the war. "Thomas isn't here." Daniel's voice wasn't cruel, just factual. "I am. And I'm proud of you. You could have run. Could have saved yourself and the babies. Instead, you stayed and fought. You saved my life when Wade had me dead to rights. You're the bravest person I've ever known." Margaret leaned against his shoulder, careful of the babies sleeping in her arms. "I couldn't lose you. I just got you. I just got all of this, a family, a reason to wake up, something to fight for. I couldn't lose it." "You won't." Daniel pressed his lips to her hair. "We're survivors, you and me. We've both been through hell and came out the other side. This ranch, these babies, this life we're building, it's ours. And nobody's taking it from us. Not outlaws, not society ladies, not death itself." They sat in silence for a while, the twins breathing softly between them. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the smoke-stained sky in shades of red and gold. The bodies were gone. The fire was out. The danger had passed. But something had changed. Margaret felt it in the way Daniel held her in the fierce protectiveness that had nothing to do with obligation. Felt it in her own heart in the way her chest ached when she'd thought he was going to die. This wasn't a marriage of convenience anymore. Wasn't a business arrangement to keep the babies safe. This was real. Messy and complicated, and born from violence, but real. "Daniel," she said softly, "when this is all cleaned up, when things settle, I want us to have a real marriage, not just on paper, not just sleeping in separate rooms and being polite. I want—" She couldn't finish, embarrassed by her own boldness. "I want that too." His voice was rough with emotion. "Been wanting it since the day I married you, if I'm being honest. But I didn't want to push. Didn't want you to feel obligated." "It's not obligation." Margaret shifted to look at him, the babies warm and heavy between them. "It's choice. I'm choosing you, Daniel McAllister. I'm choosing this life with you. These babies, this ranch, this hard, beautiful territory. All of it. I'm choosing it freely." "Then I'm the luckiest man alive." Daniel cupped her face with his free hand, his thumb brushing over the cut on her cheek. "And I'm choosing you right back, Margaret McAllister. Every stubborn, fierce, incredible part of you." He kissed her, then soft and sweet, a promise of things to come. And when they pulled apart, both were smiling, despite the exhaustion and pain. "We should probably move off the floor," Margaret said. "My legs are going numb." "In a minute." Daniel tightened his arm around her. "Right now, I just want to sit here with my family and thank God we're all still breathing." So they stayed, the four of them, huddled together on the bedroom floor while darkness fell outside and stars appeared in the smoke-stained sky. A family forged in blood and fire, bound by choice and courage, and the simple, fierce determination to protect what mattered. Later, after the babies were in their drawer and Daniel had gone to help the men with cleanup, Margaret stood at the window looking out at the ruins of the barn. They'd have to rebuild. Would take months, would use money they didn't have. But they'd do it. Together. She pressed her hand against the cool glass, remembering the moment she'd thrown herself through the window to save Daniel. Remembered the clarity of that choice, better to die protecting him than live without him. When had that happened? When had this stranger become so essential to her survival? Mrs. McAllister. Rosa Martinez appeared in the doorway, her round face concerned. She'd arrived an hour ago with supplies and sympathy. "You should rest. I'll watch the babies." "Thank you, Rosa." Margaret turned from the window. "But I need to ask you something first. When you look at me and Daniel, do we look like a real married couple? Or can you tell it's an arrangement?" Rosa smiled, wise and knowing. "Mija, I've been married 40 years. I know what real looks like. And what you have, it's real. Maybe it didn't start that way, but it is now." "How can you tell?" "The way he looks at you when you're not watching. Like you're the sun, and he's been living in darkness. The way you moved between him and that outlaw's gun without thinking. Real love doesn't think, it just acts." Rosa moved closer, took Margaret's hands. "You've been given a second chance, both of you. Don't waste it being afraid." "I'm terrified," Margaret admitted. "I lost Thomas, lost Patrick. What if I lose Daniel too? What if I let myself love him and then—" "Then you'll grieve and survive, same as you did before." Rosa's voice was firm. "But Mija, what if you don't lose him? What if you get 50 years together? Are you going to waste them being scared? Or are you going to live?" Margaret thought about that after Rosa left. Thought about fear and love, and the courage it took to open your heart after it had been broken. Thomas had been safe, comfortable, predictable. Daniel was none of those things. He was dangerous and passionate, and made her feel alive in ways she'd forgotten were possible. She was falling in love with him. Maybe had already fallen. The realization was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. When Daniel came back inside hours later, exhausted and dirty, and favoring his injured ribs, Margaret made a decision. She took his hand and led him to their bedroom. Their bedroom, not his room, and her room, but theirs. "Stay," she said simply. "Don't go back to this bunkhouse. Stay here with me, with us." Daniel's eyes searched hers. "You sure you don't have to?" "I'm sure." Margaret stepped closer, her hand on his chest over his heart. "I'm choosing this. Choosing you. Right now tonight. No more waiting for the right time or the proper mourning period. Life's too short and too uncertain. I want you here. I want us to be real." "We are real," Daniel said softly. "Been real since the moment you took those babies from my arms and didn't ask questions. Been real since you stood beside me against Victoria Ashford. Been real since you threw yourself through a window to save my life. Then let's stop pretending otherwise." Margaret rose on her toes and kissed him, and this time there was nothing chaste or polite about it. This was claiming and being claimed, choosing and being chosen. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Daniel rested his forehead against hers. "I love you," he said, the words raw and honest. "Didn't plan on it, didn't expect it, but I do. I love you, Margaret McAllister." "I love you too." She smiled, feeling tears sting her eyes. "God help us both, but I do." They moved carefully around Daniel's injuries, around the exhaustion and pain. But they came together as husband and wife, finally and fully, with 2 babies sleeping peacefully nearby, and the Wyoming darkness wrapped around them like a blessing. And in that joining, something broken in both of them finally healed. Morning came too soon, bringing with it the harsh reality of 5 dead bodies and a burned barn. Margaret woke wrapped in Daniel's arms, the twins still sleeping in their drawer, and for one perfect moment pretended the previous day had been a nightmare. Then Rose whimpered, and the spell broke. "I'll get them," Daniel murmured against her hair. "You rest." But Margaret was already moving her body, responding to motherhood's call, before her mind fully woke. She lifted Rose, then Lily, and carried them to the kitchen, where Daniel was already heating milk. They worked in synchronized silence, passing bottles and babies between them, like they'd been doing it for years instead of weeks. "Town's going to talk," Margaret said, finally, watching Daniel burp Lily with practiced ease. "About the shooting, about us. Let them talk. Daniel, 5 men are dead. Wade had connections, friends. What if nothing?" His voice was firm. "Wade and his gang murdered innocent people and got what they deserved. Any friend of his comes looking for trouble, they'll find the same end. We're not running. We're not hiding. This is our home." A knock interrupted them. Henry Porter stood on the porch, his face grave. Behind him was a man Margaret didn't recognize. Tall, silver-haired, wearing a marshal's badge. "Mrs. McAllister, Mr. McAllister," Henry said formally. "This is U.S. Marshal James Crawford. He's got questions about yesterday." Margaret's stomach dropped. "Come in, Marshal." Crawford entered, his sharp eyes taking in everything: the babies, the bullet holes in the walls, the exhaustion on their faces. He removed his hat and sat when Margaret gestured to a chair. "I've heard Sheriff Porter's account," Crawford said without preamble. "I've examined the bodies. I've talked to your ranch hands. Now I want to hear from you. Everything that happened from the moment Wade arrived." Daniel told it straight. No embellishment, no justification. Just facts. Wade's ultimatum. The attack. The decision to fight rather than surrender. The deaths. Crawford listened without interrupting. When Daniel finished, the marshal turned to Margaret. "You threw yourself through a window to save your husband. That true?" "Yes, sir." "You ever kill a man before yesterday?" "No, sir." "But you did yesterday. Shot him clean off his horse, the body shows. You feel bad about that?" Margaret met his eyes without flinching. I feel bad that I had to, but I'd do it again to protect my family. Every time. Something shifted in Crawford's expression. Good answer. Too many people lie, try to make themselves look noble. You're honest. He stood, settled his hat back on his head. Self-defense clear as day. Wade and his men were wanted in 4 territories. You did the law a favor putting them down. There'll be no charges. Relief crashed through Margaret so powerfully her knees went weak. Thank you, Marshal. Don't thank me. Thank God you're good shots. Crawford moved toward the door, then paused. One more thing. There's a bounty on Wade and his men. $2,000 split among those who brought them down. You, your husband, and your ranch hands just earned yourselves some money. After the lawmen left, Margaret sank into a chair, trembling. $2,000. Enough to rebuild the barn, Daniel said slowly. And then some. Get proper cribs for the babies. Maybe hire another hand. Blood money. Margaret looked at Rose and Lily playing contentedly on a blanket. Built on death. Built on justice. Daniel knelt beside her chair. Those men murdered Samuel and Hannah. Left these babies to die. That money's not blood money, it's restitution. Take it. Use it to build something good. Margaret wanted to argue, but exhaustion won out. All right, we'll use it for the ranch, for the baby's future. And for us. Daniel took her hand. For building the life we want. No more just surviving. Actually living. The next weeks blurred together in a haze of rebuilding and routine. The barn went up faster than expected, with hired help and neighboring ranchers who came to lend hands. The story had spread the widow and the cowboy who'd taken down Malcolm Wade's gang, and suddenly the McAllister ranch had respect it hadn't earned before. Rose and Lily grew bigger, stronger. At 6 months old, they were sitting up babbling sounds that weren't quite words, but held meaning. Rose was bold, reaching for everything, while Lily watched carefully before acting. 2 personalities emerging from identical faces. Margaret watched Daniel with them and fell deeper in love each day. He sang to them in the mornings, walked the floor with them at night. Built them a proper cradle. 2 cribs, actually side by side. Whittled wooden toys and made them laugh with silly faces. And at night, he came to her. Not just physically, though, that was part of it, but emotionally. Opening up about the war, about his family scattered across the territories, about the guilt that had driven him from place to place, seeking redemption. I don't feel guilty anymore, he told her one night, both of them exhausted from a long day. Not about surviving when others didn't. I think maybe I survived for this. For you. For them. For this family. You believe in fate now. Margaret teased gently. I believe in purpose, and my purpose is right here. 2 months after the shooting, Victoria Ashford's first letter arrived. Margaret opened it with trembling hands, half afraid the society woman had changed her mind, was demanding custody after all. But the letter was warm, full of questions about the twins' development, requests for photographs, stories about Hannah as a child. At the bottom, Victoria had written, "Thank you for loving them. Hannah would be so grateful." Margaret cried reading it, then wrote back immediately, filling pages with details about Rose's first tooth. Lily's attempts to crawl the way they held hands even in sleep. She's not trying to take them, Margaret told Daniel that evening, relief evident in her voice. She just wants to know them, to be their aunt. Then she will be. Daniel was fixing a broken fence slat, his hands steady. Family doesn't have to live together, just has to care. In November, the first snow came early, blanketing the prairie in white. Margaret stood at the window watching it fall, Rose on her hip, and marveled at how different her life was from a year ago. Then she'd been a widow alone, slowly dying inside. Now she was a wife again, a mother again, surrounded by love and purpose and hope. Mama, Rose said suddenly, her baby voice testing the word. Margaret's breath caught. What did you say? Mama? Rose patted Margaret's face with pudgy hands. Mama. Daniel. Margaret called, her voice shaking. Daniel, she said it. She called me Mama. He came running from the barn, burst through the door, covered in snow. Say it again, Rosie. Say Mama. Rose looked at him and grinned. Dada. Daniel froze, his eyes filled with tears. Did she just... Dada? Rose repeated proudly. Then Lily, not to be left out, added her voice. Mama, Dada. They stood in the kitchen, the four of them crying and laughing at the same time, because those words meant everything. Meant the twins knew who their parents were. Meant this family was real, recognized even by babies too young to understand the complicated path that had brought them together. They're ours, Margaret whispered, holding both girls now, while Daniel wrapped his arms around all three of them. Really and truly ours. Always were, Daniel said, from the moment I found them. They were always meant to be ours. Christmas came, the first the twins would experience. Margaret went overboard decorating the house with pine boughs and candles, baking more sweets than 4 people could possibly eat. Daniel carved wooden horses for the girls and a new rocking chair for Margaret. On Christmas Eve, they gathered in the parlor, Daniel, Margaret, the twins, old Jake, Miguel, Charlie, and Rosa Martinez, with her extended family. The house was full of laughter and music and the smell of roasted goose. Want to say something? Jake announced suddenly, standing with effort. Been working ranches for 40 years, seen a lot of folks come and go, but I ain't never seen anything like what you two built here. You took tragedy and made it beautiful. Took death and made it life. That's something special. Hear, hear, Miguel agreed, raising his glass. To the McAllisters, and to Rose and Lily, luckiest babies in Wyoming. Margaret looked around the crowded parlor at all these people who'd become family and felt her throat tighten. I want to say something too. A year ago I was alone. Thought I'd always be alone. Then Daniel showed up with 2 babies and changed everything. Gave me back my life. Gave me a reason to keep fighting. So thank you, all of you, for being part of this family. To family, Daniel said, raising his own glass. Blood and chosen. All of it matters. They toasted, and the twins squealed at the noise, and someone started singing, and suddenly the whole room was full of voices raised in joy. Margaret leaned against Daniel's shoulder and let herself be completely, perfectly happy. But happiness in the Wyoming territory was always fragile. The letter arrived in January, delivered by a rider who'd come from Cheyenne in a hurry. Margaret opened it with cold fingers, read the first line, and felt her world tilt. Daniel, you need to see this. He read over her shoulder, his body going rigid. The letter was from a lawyer in Kansas, Samuel Porter's lawyer. It detailed Samuel's will drawn up 6 months before his death, and it contained a provision neither of them had expected. Samuel had a brother, not Henry, another brother, younger, living in California. And in the will, Samuel had named this brother Thomas Porter as guardian of his children should anything happen to him and Hannah. Thomas Porter has been notified of Samuel and Hannah's deaths, the lawyer wrote. He is currently traveling east and expects to arrive in Wyoming by late February to claim his nieces and fulfill his brotherly duty. Margaret's hands shook so badly the paper rattled. Another uncle, one with legal claim in the will. Henry never mentioned a younger brother. Maybe he didn't know. Maybe they were estranged. Margaret sank into a chair, her mind racing. But Daniel, this man Thomas he's named in the will, that supersedes our guardianship. He could take them. Like hell. Daniel's voice was cold iron. Those babies are ours. Some stranger doesn't get to show up and take them because his brother wrote his name on a piece of paper. The law? Damn the law. We'll fight. Get lawyers. Prove we're better parents than some man who's never even met them. With what money? The bounty's gone into the ranch. We can't afford lawyers who could fight this. They stared at each other, the weight of potential loss crushing down. After everything they'd survived, everything they'd built, was it all going to be torn away by legal documents and blood claims? "We could run," Daniel said suddenly. "Take the babies and disappear. Oregon maybe, or Mexico, somewhere they can't find us. And spend our lives looking over our shoulders, teaching Rose and Lily to hide who they are." Margaret shook her head. "That's no life for them, or for us." "Then what?" Margaret looked at her hands thinking. Then she stood, decision made. "Then we meet this Thomas Porter, see what kind of man he is, and we fight with every legal means we have. We don't run, we don't hide. We prove we're the best parents these babies could have. And if that's not enough," she met his eyes, saw her own fear reflected there, "then we make it enough." Henry Porter came by the next day, his face haggard. "You got the letter." "Why didn't you tell us Samuel had another brother?" Margaret demanded. "Because I didn't think Thomas would come. He and Samuel barely spoke after Thomas went west. They had a falling out over family land never reconciled. I figured Thomas would get the notice and ignore it, let me handle things." Henry scrubbed his face. "I was wrong." "What's he like, this Thomas?" "Last I knew him, he was stubborn as mule and twice as mean. But that was 15 years ago. People change." Henry's voice didn't sound convinced. "I wired him, told him the babies are settled, happy with good people. Asked him to reconsider. He wired back one word, coming." The waiting was agony. February dragged by each day, bringing Thomas Porter closer. Margaret threw herself into caring for the twins, memorizing every detail, as if these might be her last months with them. The way Rose scrunched her nose when she laughed. The way Lily's hand always found her sister's when she slept. The way both girls reached for Margaret when they were scared, and Daniel when they wanted to play. "They won't remember us if he takes them," Margaret said one night, her voice breaking. "They're too young. In a year we'll just be strangers they don't recognize." "He's not taking them." Daniel's arms tightened around her. "I won't allow it." "You can't stop the law. Watch me." But they both knew the truth. Without money for lawyers, without legal claims stronger than a will, they were helpless. All they could do was wait and hope Thomas Porter's heart was softer than his legal rights. The telegram came on February 28th. Arriving March 1st, noon train. Thomas Porter. Margaret barely slept that night. She held the twins longer than necessary, sang to them in Irish, whispered promises she couldn't guarantee. Daniel sat with her, both of them watching the babies sleep like they were memorizing something precious before it vanished. "Whatever happens tomorrow," Daniel said quietly, "I want you to know this has been the best 4 months of my life. You and those babies gave me everything I thought I'd lost in the war: purpose, family, love. Even if we lose them, I'll never regret it." "Don't talk like that." Margaret's voice was fierce. "We're not losing them. We're not." But when March 1st dawned cold and clear, Margaret dressed the twins in their best clothes with shaking hands. Rose's blue dress, Lily's pink one. Tiny shoes Rosa had knitted. Ribbons in their dark hair, making them beautiful for the man who might take them away. The whole household went to the train station. Daniel, Margaret, the twins. Henry, Jake, Miguel. Charlie, and Rosa. A show of force, maybe. Or just people who couldn't bear to miss the moment that would decide everything. The noon train arrived on time, belching steam and cinders. Passengers disembarked slowly. Margaret held both twins, one in each arm, her heart hammering so hard she thought she might be sick. Then she saw him. A man stepping down from the first-class car, tall and lean, with Samuel's dark hair and sharp features. He wore an expensive suit, carried a leather bag, and moved with the confidence of someone used to getting his way. Thomas Porter had arrived to claim his nieces, and Margaret knew, looking at his cold eyes and set jaw, that he wasn't going to be easily convinced to leave them behind. Thomas Porter's eyes swept over the group waiting on the platform and landed on the twins in Margaret's arms. His face remained impassive, but something flickered in his expression. Recognition maybe, or grief. "Henry," he said, his voice clipped and eastern despite years in California. "You look old." "You look rich," Henry replied without warmth. "Didn't expect you'd actually come." "Samuel was my brother. These are his children. Of course I came." Thomas's gaze shifted to Margaret and Daniel. "You must be the McAllisters, the ones who've been playing house with my nieces." Margaret's arms tightened around the twins. "We're not playing. We're raising them. There's a difference." "For now." Thomas moved closer, studying Rose and Lily with an appraising look that made Margaret's skin crawl. "They look healthy enough. That's something at least." "They're more than healthy," Daniel said, his voice hard. "They're loved. They're happy. They know us as their parents." "Touching." Thomas's tone suggested it was anything but. "But legally irrelevant. Samuel's will names me as guardian. I've already consulted with lawyers in Cheyenne. Your claim doesn't supersede mine." "Then why are you here?" Margaret demanded. "Why not just send the law to collect them?" For the first time, Thomas's composure cracked slightly. "Because I wanted to see them, see where my brother died, see who's been caring for his daughters." He paused. "And because my wife insisted I meet you before making any final decisions." "Your wife?" Henry's eyebrows shot up. "You're married." 5 years now. Catherine's waiting at the hotel. She wanted to come, but the train journey was hard on her. She's expecting our first child in June. Thomas's voice softened fractionally when he mentioned his wife. "She's the one who convinced me to come personally rather than sending lawyers." Margaret felt a tiny spark of hope. A wife, a pregnant wife. That changed things. "Then come to the ranch, meet the twins properly, see how they're being raised, then decide." Thomas considered this. "Very well. I'll collect Catherine and we'll come tomorrow. But Mrs. McAllister, don't mistake this for weakness. I came to claim my brother's children. That hasn't changed." After he left, Margaret sagged against Daniel, barely holding herself together. "He's going to take them. I can see it in his eyes. He's already decided." "Not if his wife has anything to say about it," Rosa said quietly. "A pregnant woman has different eyes. Let her see those babies being loved. Let her see you. Then we'll know." That night, Margaret couldn't sleep. She paced the bedroom while the twins slept peacefully, their small hands clasped together in the drawer that had become their first cradle. Daniel watched her from the bed, his expression troubled. "Come here," he said softly. "You're going to wear a hole in the floor." Margaret climbed into bed but couldn't settle. What if tomorrow doesn't change his mind? What if he takes them anyway? Then we fight harder. Appeal to courts, get character witnesses, prove they're better off here. Daniel pulled her against his chest. "But Margaret, we have to be prepared for the possibility that we might lose." "Don't say that." "I have to say it, because if we lose them, we can't let it destroy us. We can't let it destroy what we've built together." His arms tightened. "I love those babies with everything I have. But I love you too. And if the worst happens, we'll survive it together." Margaret pressed her face against his shirt, breathing in his familiar scent. "I don't want to survive it. I want to keep them. I want our family to stay whole." "So do I. More than anything." Daniel kissed the top of her head. "So tomorrow, we show Thomas Porter and his wife exactly what kind of family we are, and we pray it's enough." Thomas and Catherine Porter arrived at noon the next day in a hired carriage. Catherine was younger than Margaret expected, maybe 25, with kind eyes and a gentle manner. She was visibly pregnant, her hand resting protectively on her swollen belly as she descended from the carriage. "Mrs. McAllister," she said warmly, extending her hand. "Thank you for agreeing to see us. I know this must be difficult." Margaret shook her hand, surprised by the genuine sympathy in Catherine's voice. Please come inside. The twins just woke from their nap." Inside, Rose and Lily were in their playpen, another thing Daniel had built, batting at wooden toys and babbling to each other. Catherine gasped when she saw them. "Oh, Thomas, look at them. They're beautiful." Thomas's expression softened for the first time since arriving. He knelt beside the playpen, and Lily crawled toward him, curious. She grabbed his finger with her tiny hand, and Thomas's face crumpled slightly. "Hello, little one," he said hoarsely. "You look just like your father did as a baby. Samuel would be so proud." Margaret watched Catherine. Watching her husband, saw the tears in the younger woman's eyes. This wasn't a couple looking to steal children away. This was a couple grieving a lost brother and trying to do right by his daughters. "Would you like to hold them?" Margaret offered, her voice steady, despite her racing heart. Catherine nodded eagerly. Margaret lifted Rose and placed her in Catherine's arms. The baby studied the new face carefully, then reached up to pat Catherine's cheek. Catherine laughed through her tears. "She's precious. They both are." Catherine looked at Margaret. "How long have you been caring for them?" "Since August, nearly 7 months now." Margaret sat beside her. "Would you like to hear about them? Their personalities, their routines, what they like?" "Please." So Margaret told them everything. How Rose was bold and adventurous, always reaching for things beyond her grasp. How Lily was thoughtful and observant, watching carefully before acting. How they held hands when they slept. How Rose had said Mama first, but Lily had said Dada. How they loved when Daniel sang to them in the mornings, and when Margaret hummed Irish lullabies at night. Catherine listened with rapt attention, occasionally looking at Thomas, whose face grew more troubled with each detail. When Margaret finished, Catherine handed Rose back gently. "Thomas," she said quietly, "we need to talk, outside." They excused themselves to the porch. Through the window, Margaret could see them in intense discussion. Catherine's hands moved expressively. Thomas shook his head several times. Catherine put her hand on her belly, said something that made Thomas's shoulders slump. "What are they saying?" Daniel asked, coming to stand beside Margaret. "I can't hear, but she's fighting for us, I can tell." They came back inside 10 minutes later. Thomas's face was drawn, but Catherine looked determined. She took a seat and gestured for Margaret and Daniel to sit as well. "I need to tell you something," Catherine began. "Thomas and we've been trying to have a child for 5 years. This pregnancy is a miracle. I was told I likely couldn't conceive." She paused, her hand on her belly. "I know what it means to want a child desperately. To have that want be all-consuming." "Catherine." Thomas started, but she held up her hand. "Let me finish." She turned to Margaret. "I see how you look at those babies. I see how they respond to you. That's not something that can be faked or forced. That's real love, real attachment, real family." "They're still Samuel's children," Thomas said, but his voice lacked its earlier conviction. "I have a legal obligation." "You have a legal right," Catherine corrected. "But obligation is to do what's best for them, not what's easiest for us or what satisfies some family duty." She looked at the twins still playing in their pen. "Thomas, we're about to have our own baby. We'll have our hands full. And these girls, they already have parents. Good parents who saved them and loved them and would die for them. Samuel named me. Samuel named you before he knew Daniel and Margaret existed, before these babies had a home and a family." Catherine's voice was gentle but firm. "If Samuel could see them now, see how happy they are, don't you think he'd want them to stay?" Thomas was quiet for a long time, his jaw working. Finally, he looked at Margaret and Daniel. "Tell me about Sweetwater Crossing. Everything. I want to know how my brother died." Daniel told the story again, every brutal detail. The massacre, the hidden babies, the desperate ride, the note Hannah had written with death bearing down on her. Thomas's face went white, his fists clenching. "So my brother died protecting his daughters, and his wife died making sure they'd survive." His voice broke. "And you risked your life to save them. Rode 40 miles when you could have left them. Why?" "Because they deserved a chance," Daniel said simply. Because leaving them to die would have been wrong. Because sometimes you don't choose what's right chooses you. Thomas stood abruptly, walked to the window. His shoulders shook, and Margaret realized he was crying. Catherine went to him, put her arms around him from behind, murmured something too quiet to hear. When Thomas turned back, his eyes were red but clear. I came here to take them, to fulfill what I thought was my duty to Samuel. But Samuel's duty was to his daughters, not to me. And his daughters? He looked at Rose and Lily. They already have what they need. They have parents who love them, a home, a family. Taking them from that wouldn't honor Samuel's memory. It would betray it. Margaret couldn't breathe. Are you saying? I'm saying they stay with you. Thomas's voice was firm now, decided. I'll sign whatever legal documents are necessary to transfer guardianship permanently. They're your daughters, Mrs. McAllister, legally and in every way that matters. Margaret's legs gave out. Daniel caught her, holding her up as sobs racked her body. Catherine was crying too, and even Thomas's eyes were wet. Only the twins were unbothered, babbling happily to each other, unaware that their entire future had just been decided. Thank you, Margaret managed through her tears. Thank you. Don't thank me. You're the ones who saved them, who loved them when nobody else could. Thomas crossed the room, extended his hand to Daniel. Samuel would thank you. I'm thanking you for giving his daughters the life he wanted for them. Daniel shook his hand, his grip firm. We'll tell them about their parents, about Samuel and Hannah, and how much they were loved. They'll know where they came from. And they'll know they have an uncle who cares about them, Thomas added. Catherine and we'd like to visit, to be part of their lives, if that's acceptable. More than acceptable, Margaret said, wiping her eyes. They should know all their family. You, Henry, Victoria. Everyone who loved Samuel and Hannah. Catherine stood moved to the playpen. She lifted Lily carefully, held her close. I'm your Aunt Catherine, she whispered to the baby. And I'm so glad you have such wonderful parents. Your mama and papa in heaven would be so proud. They stayed for dinner, and the atmosphere transformed from tense to warm. Thomas told stories about Samuel as a child, about the brothers they'd been before pride and distance drove them apart. Catherine talked about preparing for their own baby, and Margaret offered advice about feeding schedules and sleepless nights. As the sun set, Thomas and Catherine prepared to leave. At the door, Thomas paused. I need to ask you something. Why did you do it? Not just save them, but take them in. Marry a stranger. Fight outlaws. Risk everything for babies that weren't yours. Margaret looked at Daniel, then at Rose and Lily, sleeping in their cribs, finally at Thomas. Because they needed saving. Because walking away would have been choosing death over life. And because sometimes you don't find your family finds you. Broken and desperate and in need of exactly what you can give. Thomas nodded slowly. Samuel always said there was more good in the world than evil. That even in the darkest times people would step up and do what's right. I stopped believing that after he died. But you, he gestured to encompass the house, the twins Daniel and Margaret together. You proved him right. Thank you for that. After they left, Margaret and Daniel stood together on the porch, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. The Wyoming wind carried the smell of spring, coming of new grass and melting snow and endless possibility. We get to keep them, Margaret whispered, still not quite believing it. They're really ours. They were always ours. Daniel pulled her close. From the moment I found them. From the moment you took them without question. They were always meant to be ours. Inside, Rose began to cry, hungry, again. Always hungry. Margaret started to move, but Daniel caught her hand. Wait, just one more minute. Let me look at you. At this. At everything we built against all odds. Margaret turned to face him fully, this man who'd ridden into her life carrying orphaned babies and changed everything. I love you, Daniel McAllister. I love you so much it terrifies me. I love you too. You and those girls are my whole world, my reason for everything." He kissed her softly. "Thank you for being brave enough to say yes when I showed up on your porch half dead. Thank you for fighting beside me. Thank you for choosing this life, this family, me." "Always," Margaret promised. "From now until forever. Always." They went inside together to feed the crying baby and check on the sleeping one to do the 1,000 small tasks that made up family life. And as Margaret heated milk and Daniel changed Rose's diaper, and they moved around each other with practiced ease, she understood something profound. This was what Samuel and Hannah had died protecting. This simple, beautiful possibility that their daughters would be loved and safe and raised by people who chose them freely. That they would grow up knowing home and family and the fierce protection of parents who would fight the world to keep them. The months that followed were the happiest of Margaret's life. Spring came early, bringing wildflowers and warm winds. The ranch prospered with the bounty money wisely invested. Rose and Lily grew bigger, stronger, starting to pull themselves up on furniture and cruise along edges determined to walk. Victoria visited in June, arriving with trunks full of gifts and tears in her eyes when she saw how much the twins had grown. She stayed 2 weeks helping with the babies, telling stories about Hannah slowly becoming the beloved Aunt Victoria that Margaret had hoped for. Catherine and Thomas's son was born in July, a healthy boy they named Samuel after his uncle. When they brought him to visit at 3 months old, Rose and Lily were fascinated by the tiny baby, patting his head with clumsy gentleness. "Look at that," Catherine said, watching them. "Cousins growing up together. Samuel would love this." "He's watching," Thomas said quietly. "Him and Hannah both, and they're grateful." On Rose and Lily's first birthday in March 1879, Margaret and Daniel threw a party that half the county attended. There was cake and music and laughter, and when the twins demolished their individual cakes with gleeful abandon, everyone cheered. That night, after the guests had left, and the twins were asleep in their big girl beds, no longer in dresser drawers but proper beds Daniel had built, Margaret and Daniel sat on their porch in the gathering darkness. "A year ago I was alone," Margaret said softly. "Thought I'd always be alone, that I'd lost everything that mattered and would just go through the motions until I died." "A year ago I was drifting," Daniel replied. "No purpose, no home, just existing day to day. Then I heard gunshots at Sweetwater Crossing and everything changed." "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you'd ridden past, if you'd decided it wasn't your problem?" "Every day." Daniel's hand found hers in the darkness. "And every day I thank God I didn't. Because finding those babies led me to you. Led me to this family, this home, this life. I was dead inside after the war, Margaret. Just breathing, but not living. You brought me back to life." "We saved each other," Margaret said. "You, me, and 2 baby girls who needed parents as much as we needed them." Inside, one of the twins whimpered in her sleep. Both Margaret and Daniel tensed, listening. But the sound faded, and Rose or Lily, they couldn't tell which settled back into peaceful sleep. "They'll never remember Sweetwater Crossing," Daniel said. "Never remember Samuel and Hannah dying. Never remember being hidden in that wagon floor. Is that good or bad?" "It's mercy," Margaret decided. "They'll know the story when they're older. We'll tell them about their brave parents who died protecting them. But they won't carry the trauma. They'll only carry the love from Hannah and Samuel from us, from everyone who fought to keep them safe. That's what they'll remember." Years passed in a blur of joy and hard work. Rose and Lily learned to walk, then run, then ride. They grew into bright, curious girls who looked identical, but acted nothing alike. Rose was wild and fearless, always climbing trees and racing horses. Lily was thoughtful and gentle, preferring books and quiet conversations. They called Margaret and Daniel Mama and Papa without question, without confusion. And when they were old enough to understand, Margaret and Daniel told them the truth about Samuel and Hannah, about Sweetwater Crossing, about the desperate ride that had brought them to this ranch and this family. So our first mama and papa died saving us? Rose asked at age 7, her face serious. Yes, Margaret said gently. They loved you so much, they gave their lives to protect you. And then you and Papa found us and saved us, Lily added. Your Papa found you, Margaret corrected. I just opened my home and my heart. That's still saving, Rose decided with 7-year-old logic. So we have 2 sets of parents, the ones who gave us life and the ones who gave us a life. That's more than most people get. Margaret's eyes filled with tears. That's exactly right, sweetheart. On their 10th birthday, the twins asked to visit Sweetwater Crossing. Henry went with them along with Margaret and Daniel. The ford was just water and rocks, now no sign of the tragedy that had happened there 12 years before. But Margaret saw it in her mind, the burning wagon, the scattered bodies, 2 babies hidden in the darkness. She saw Daniel riding away with them, clutched to his chest, saw herself running across the yard to meet him, saw the path that had led from death to life, from tragedy to love. This is where our story began, Rose said quietly, standing at the water's edge. Where everything changed. For all of us, Daniel agreed. I came here a drifter with no purpose, rode away a father with everything that mattered. Lily knelt by the water, touched it gently. Thank you, she whispered. Mama Hannah and Papa Samuel. Thank you for loving us enough to hide us. We won't forget you. Rose knelt beside her sister, and they held hands in the rushing water while the adults stood silent witness. 2 girls honoring the parents who'd died for them while standing beside the parents who'd lived for them. Past and present, braided together, inseparable, wholly. That evening, back at the ranch, Margaret stood at the window watching her daughters chase each other across the prairie grass, while Daniel leaned against the corral fence, laughing at their antics. The sun was setting in shades of gold and crimson, painting everything beautiful. Mrs. McAllister. Old Jake appeared at her elbow. He was ancient now, barely able to work, but refusing to leave the ranch that had become his home. Been thinking about something. What's that, Jake? Been here since the beginning. Since that day Daniel rode in half dead with those babies. Watched you build this family from nothing but determination and love. He paused. You ever regret it? Taking them in the hard road, it became. Margaret thought about everything. The fear, the fights, the near losses, the outlaws and the society lady and the uncle who could have taken them away. The sleepless nights and the constant worry and the 1,000 small sacrifices. Not for 1 second, she said firmly. Every hard moment was worth it. Every fight, every fear, every sacrifice. Because they gave me back my life, Jake. They gave us all a reason to be more than we were. Jake nodded, satisfied. That's what I thought. Just wanted to hear you say it. That night, after the twins were in bed and the house was quiet, Daniel found Margaret in their bedroom, looking at the dresser drawer they'd kept all these years. The drawer that had been Rose and Lily's first cradle, now kept in the corner as a reminder. You thinking about that first night? Daniel asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind. Thinking about all of it. How impossible it seemed. How scared I was. How certain I was that we'd lose them at every turn. But we didn't. No. Margaret turned in his arms. We didn't. Because we fought for them. Because we chose them and each other and this family every single day. That's what love is, isn't it? Not the easy moments, but the choice to keep choosing. Wise woman, Daniel murmured, kissing her forehead. Beautiful, brave, wise woman who took a chance on a desperate cowboy and 2 orphaned babies. Best decision I ever made, Margaret said, second only to saying yes when you proposed this crazy arrangement. Not so crazy now. No, not crazy at all. Just perfect. They stood together in the darkness, holding each other, while their daughters slept peacefully down the hall and the Wyoming wind sang through the eaves. Outside, the prairie stretched endlessly in all directions, harsh and beautiful and full of promise. This was what mattered. Not the blood that bound people, or the laws that defined families. Not the tragedies that tried to break them, or the obstacles that stood in their way. What mattered was this: choosing each other day after day, moment after moment. Fighting for what you loved. Building something beautiful from broken pieces. Creating family not through biology, but through fierce, deliberate, unshakable love. Daniel had ridden through death to bring 2 babies to safety. Margaret had opened her home and her heart without hesitation. Together, they'd fought outlaws and society and the law itself to keep their family intact. And in the end, love had won. Not because it was easy, but because they'd refused to let it be anything else. That's what Rose and Lily would carry with them, always: not the trauma of their birth parents' deaths, but the certainty that they were wanted, chosen, fought for. That their family was built on something stronger than blood or obligation. Built on the radical act of saying yes to love, when it would have been easier to say no. And years later, when Rose and Lily had families of their own, when they told their children about the cowboy who'd saved them and the widow who'd raised them, they would say this: "We were born to parents who died protecting us. We were saved by a hero who rode through hell to bring us home. We were raised by a mother who chose love over loneliness, and a father who chose purpose over drifting. We are the daughters of courage and sacrifice, and fierce, unbreakable love. And that is worth more than gold, more than comfort, more than anything this world can offer. That is the legacy we carry. That is who we are." And in those words, in that story, Samuel and Hannah Porter would live forever. Daniel's desperate ride would be remembered. Margaret's courage would be honored. And 2 babies hidden in a wagon floor would become 2 strong women who understood that family is always, always a choice, and that choosing love, no matter the cost, is the most powerful thing any person can do. The story that began at Sweetwater Crossing with death and blood and tragedy ended at a Wyoming ranch with life and love and joy. Not because the pain was forgotten, but because it had been transformed into something beautiful, something worthy of the sacrifice that made it possible. That was the true miracle. Not survival, but transformation. Not just living, but building a life so full of love that even death couldn't diminish it. And every night when Margaret and Daniel tucked their daughters into bed and kissed their foreheads and whispered, "I love you," they were keeping a promise made by parents who'd died too soon and honored by parents who'd chosen to stay. The promise was simple: you are loved. You are chosen. You are home. And that promise, spoken across years and through tears, and despite every obstacle the world could throw at them, was the only thing that ever really mattered. The McAllister family lived loved and proved that the strongest bonds are forged not in blood, but in the choice to fight for each other against every impossible odd, and that is the only legacy worth leaving behind.